Hi, I'm Rubie Britt-Height, Director of Community Relations at the Mint Museum in Charlotte, North Carolina. Welcome to Classic Black, the basalt sculpture of Wedgwood and his contemporaries. We are so excited about this phenomenal exhibition that is here at Mint Museum Randolph. We have two locations, so this is our Randolph location. And I have the honor of having with me today our Senior Curator of Decorative Art, Brian Gallagher, who is a curator for this wonderful exhibition. Brian, great to have you, and let's have a community conversation.
Thanks, Rubie. I appreciate that. Before we go any further, I really would just like to take this opportunity first to thank you. So let me talk about this exhibition, this baby I'm pretty proud of, I admit. But I also really need to give a shout out to the entire Mint staff. As you well know, every time we do an exhibition of this caliber, of this size, it really does involve virtually every person on staff who contributes their talents, their time, their skills, their passion. And I was so dependent on that in this particular case for this exhibition. I also want to really acknowledge the wonderful financial support we got from our sponsors, without whom the exhibition could not have taken place. So Wells Fargo Private Bank came in as our presenting sponsor, and we are just always so grateful to them, especially for their support of this exhibition. Moore and Van Allen and Crest Foundation also helped out tremendously on the exhibition, and the Dell Home Service League, the ceramics affiliate of the Mint, supported the catalog that accompanies this show. So thank you.
And we thank them. Wonderful. And I'm excited for you that you have a wonderful catalog that goes along with us that our guests can purchase through our store or just stop by.
That's right. I hope people consider doing that.
Coffee table lineup.
That's, yeah.
So tell us where we are and what we've got.
Sure. Well, one of the ideas we discussed early on, and you'll be talking with some of my partners in crime who made these galleries look the way they do, and for which I will be eternally grateful, was to send a subtle message to our visitors that even though I truly, personally believe that every single object we're going to be looking at today deserves to be in a museum, it's of a high aesthetic caliber, I'm glad that people can come in and enjoy them in our museum right now. But the important thing is that at the end of the day, these were products that Wedgwood, Josiah Wedgwood, and other Staffordshire potters had to make in order to make a living. This was their livelihood. And so one of the things that comes to light about Josiah Wedgwood is that he was very innovative on a number of fronts. He really was a very talented potter, but it turns out he was also a consummate marketer. And one of the ideas that he pioneers among the Staffordshire pottery industry is to open a showroom in London. He was again in Staffordshire in north central England. He opens the showroom in England's capital, where all the swells of the city could come and look at the products that he had for sale and place their orders. It was a great decision on his part. And so we followed that lead, if you will, in the way we installed our 3 galleries here, that we set them up as showrooms. And similar to what you would experience if you went into an IKEA or a Belk or another elegant department store today and went to the furniture floor and saw that bedroom set or that dining room set installed in a room that looked like an actual dining room or bedroom and so on, to give you an idea how it might look in your own room at home. That's what we're going for here. So this first room, this beautiful pink gallery, is meant to suggest a sculpture hall showroom. Why sculpture hall? Well, it turns out that in the late 18th century, if you were an affluent young man in particular of means, you had a classical education when you were in school. You read Homer and Plato and Socrates and so on, studied Socrates. But then when you reached a certain age, in your early 20s probably, you went on what was called a grand tour. You traveled from England through continental Europe, ending up absolutely in Italy, where you studied all of the wonderful works of art and architecture that culture had been producing since classical antiquity. So Wedgwood is playing off of that. He's very aware of that trend, and he's always looking to cater to the upper classes. He writes at one point to his longtime business associate, Thomas Bentley, start at the head and the rest will follow. In other words, get the people of the upper echelons of English society interested in your wares, and people from the middling classes will likewise want to buy. So many of the works of art that are in this gallery are derived from original works of art that people would have seen if they had gone on a grand tour. Like this beautiful sculpture here of this young boy, virtually life-size, only about 22 inches long, and he's sleeping, and it turns out he's meant to be the Roman god Somnus, the god of sleep in Roman mythology. We know that because in his left hand, there's a poppy flower, and a poppy, of course, was an attribute or a symbol of sleep. Mm-hmm. People would have seen the original of this, that this was copied from, when they went on a grand tour. It turned out to be a black marble sculpture, not clay at all, but black marble, that was made by a man named Alessandro Algardi, a very talented sculptor, designer in 17th century Rome, what art historians call the Baroque period. And in 1635, he makes his black marble sculpture of Somnus for the Borghese family of Rome, a very prominent noble family in Rome. So people could have gone on the grand tour and seen that black marble version. Wedgwood, in turn, is making a copy of it in his black basalt stoneware.
And what is black basalt?
So black basalt is this fine-grained stoneware that's been stained black through and through. It truly is black all the way through. It's not black because of an enamel treatment or a glaze on the outer surface. If we were to turn this over, or God forbid, if a part of it broke off, you would see that the clay wall is black through and through. Mm-hmm. Wedgwood, Josiah Wedgwood, perfects that ceramic body in 1768 by combining some key ingredients. One is starts off, believe it or not, with this fine white clay that he imports from Dorset in southwestern England, very, very fine grain. And to that white clay, he adds manganese, which is a metallic oxide, and then something called CARR, C-A-R-R, which is this sludgy material that's formed when iron oxide drips down through the coal mines, the coal deposits, and mixes with the clay or earth that's underneath it and turns sort of blackish in color. So he mixes those 3 ingredients, Josiah does, to certain proportions, and his black basalt stoneware is perfected.
And he uses a mold to create each.
That's right. There was an industry in the late 18th century England that doesn't even exist anymore, but there were these plaster shops where people like Josiah Wedgwood and other potters, other designers working in other media could go and buy the molds or the casts of particular sculptural work to create their own version of that. And so this statue of Somnus comes from a mold that Wedgwood bought from one of those plaster shops. Hoskins and Oliver is what it was called in 1770, and then goes on to produce it. Now, it sounds like when I say that Wedgwood is just copying what someone else already did, but I do want to point out that he often wasn't very happy with the quality of those molds that he bought from plaster shops. And so he more often than not had one of his workmen, particularly a man named William Hackwood, fine-tune it a bit, sharpen up the details and so on. Likewise, there were other works of art that truly were created as originals in the Wedgwood factory. So it's really kind of a mix.
And Wedgwood also has some contemporaries who were doing quality work as well.
Yes,
and we have some of those in
That's
our...
absolutely right. Let me take you over here.
Great.
We'll talk about that. So thanks, Rubie. You're absolutely right. Josiah Wedgwood really does lead the charge in producing these high-quality ornamental wares in black basalt, but it is not long from the time he starts doing that in 1768 that other Staffordshire potters are making it the same material as well. And one of those potters or factories is the one owned by James Neal. Neal actually was not a potter himself. He was not trained to be a potter. He was a merchant, if you will, a retailer of sorts. But he buys the factory of another potter named Humphrey Palmer when Palmer retires and takes it over and goes on to create some really beautiful, very fine quality basalt wares himself that absolutely, to my mind, rival what Wedgwood is producing. So here we have this figure of Cleopatra, and from the ancient world, of course, Queen of Egypt, and then Lucretia here, who was a woman, probably apocryphal, from ancient Rome, who committed suicide because she was abducted by the son of the despotic king, and she was so distraught by that she killed herself, and it was her suicide that leads to the founding of the Republic of Rome way back when. More importantly, though, this is just a really beautiful sculpture, likewise a nice vase, and all of these objects made by Neal and Company in the late 18th century.
Wonderful. Well, let's go on to the next point.
Sure.
We're following you.
All right.
Brian, isn't this the piece from the cover of the catalog on Black Basalt?
It is, Rubie. Thanks for noticing that. This is the infant Hercules strangling the serpent. It, as you can see, truly is a life-size depiction of a young boy. It's referencing the ancient myth when Hera, the goddess, the queen of all the gods on Mount Olympus, finds out that her husband Zeus, the king of all the gods, has just had his latest affair. He was a notorious philanderer, and he had an affair with a mortal woman named Alcmene, and the product of that illicit affair was the baby Hercules. So Hera, in a jealous rage, sends 2 giant, ferocious, poisonous serpents to kill the child in his crib. She was just so angry about her husband's philandering. The serpents arrive. Before anyone can rush in to rescue the child, Hercules just sits up in his crib and strangles those serpents as easily as can be, thus revealing for the first time that he was a demigod, and particularly that he possessed supernatural strength. And then, of course, Hercules goes on as an adult to have many more conquests and accomplishments. So here we just have one snake, and admittedly, it's I always sort of chuckle a little bit about this sculpture because there isn't a lot of dramatic intensity. Normally, when you see this subject depicted in art, the snake's head, or both snakes' heads for that matter, are right there at the child's face, and you really feel this life and death, very dramatic moment. And here we have this snake's tail draped over his arm, and Rubie, you'll notice that the snake's head is all the way around behind the child's side, and it doesn't look particularly fierce. It almost looks like it's smiling. So what's going on here? Well, I mentioned this idea of the plaster shops and molds. Somebody, and we don't know who, it definitely wasn't Wedgwood. I actually don't even think it was Hoskins and Grant or Hoskins and Oliver. There were 2 different versions of that firm. I don't think it was them either. I think somebody got a hold of or found this marble sculpture from the ancient world that today is in Vienna, made a cast of it, and it was really just meant to be the original depiction of a Roman boy. And they thought, well, with a few key changes, we can make this the infant Hercules and make it more marketable. So the one change they made was, in the original marble sculpture, the boy's right hand is reaching out, and here they turned it so that there's something for the snake to drape over, right? The other thing is they switched out the animal. So in the original, the baby's left hand is resting on his pet goose. He's like literally just petting his pet goose very gently. And here, of course, instead of the goose, it's the snake. So perhaps it doesn't have the dramatic intensity one would expect when you know it's supposed to be that particular myth. But I love this sculpture because this and the sumness, which we already saw, and many of the works of art in this gallery in particular, were made during the first 6 or so years of Wedgwood's black basalt manufacture. In other words, in the beginning of an industry, when he was working out firing temperatures, when he was dealing with low quality molds, when he didn't have talented modelers on staff himself who could make these things, he was producing these amazing objects. So I just love this because it just speaks so much about Wedgwood's willingness to push the technological envelope, to go where no one else had gone before in clay like this.
And also to be able to kind of rewrite the story.
And to rewrite the story.
As the artist himself, to change the narrative.
That's right, absolutely correct, yeah. And then finally, to the best of our knowledge, this is the only surviving example of this. So this is a very, very rare sculpture made at the Wedgwood factory as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brian.
Sure.
I'm following you to the next room.
All right.
Brian, isn't it Socrates?
It is, Rubie, thank you. Yeah, it's a great bust of the ancient philosopher, very notable, of course. And the reason he's here is because we're now in our second gallery for the exhibition, our second showroom. And whereas the first one we were in was meant to evoke a sculpture hall, this one is meant to suggest a library. The library was a very important room in an elegant residence in the 18th century. It was used by all members of the household, not just the man of the house as it was in previous centuries. People engaged in letter writing and card games and convivial conversation, but they also read. And of course, there were many more books published in the late 18th century than had ever been before. So these libraries actually looked like a library with lovely bookcases filled with books. And one popular method of decoration was to put a portrait bust above a bookcase. Oftentimes, the subject of the bust might be someone whose writings was contained in that bookcase below. And so Socrates here, we have many other busts in this gallery. These were made for those affluent members of society to adorn their libraries, either on top of bookcases or maybe in the broken pediment above a doorway or on a wide windowsill and so on.
I'm sure Classic Black would have been in this library as well.
I'd like to think so. Thank you.
So while we're here in the library, Brian, tell us how this exhibition actually came about.
Sure, thank you. Well, so here we are in 2020, right? I joined the museum staff in July 2007, 13 plus years ago. And sometime within the first year or so of my having come to the Mint, I was stumbling around, I do sort of mean stumbling, in our storerooms because they're a little on the dark side and very crowded. And I noticed this guy on the floor, tucked away in the corner of one of our storerooms where we store our decorative arts objects that are not on view. We're looking at Junius Brutus, who is a figure from ancient Rome, who purportedly helped to get the citizens of Rome to rise up to overthrow the despotic king. This is about 400 BCE or so. And then he became the first co-consul of the Republic of Rome. So he's an important figure in ancient Roman history. He was a role model in the 18th century because of his support of republicanism. So at a time when people were both in England and across the English Channel, particularly in France, were feeling very agitated about the absolute power of the monarch, which of course leads to some revolutions here and there. Junius Brutus was considered quite a hero in the 18th century. But again, this was tucked away in our storeroom, and to the best of my knowledge, had never been on view. And I just thought it was such a great work of art. And then not only did I find this, but I found a few other objects of similar quality in black basalt that we had in our own collection that had not been on view. And that was the genesis for this exhibition 13 years later.
Wow. Uprisings and revolutions, they continue all throughout.
That's right.
Junius, it's nice to see you. Okay, so tell us what else we have here, Brian, quickly before we go to the next gallery.
Well, funnily enough, right below Junius, and I know these are small for our visitors to see. So he starts the Republic of Rome. Mm-hmm. The Republic is followed by the imperial period, Julius Caesar and the other emperors. And so these small portrait medallions are the 12 Caesars, the so-called 12 Caesars, starting with Julius on the upper left corner, and then we have Augustus and Nero and Galba and Caligula and all the rest. Some more despotic than others, but they ruled Rome from about the 1st century or so BCE for the next few centuries.
So in this particular gallery, we have a lot of medallions, we have a lot of busts, and then we go to the next gallery, which is
the showroom that's meant to evoke the drawing room.
All right. Show us the way. Brian, in the drawing rooms, they entertain with style. So tell us about this beautiful drawing room.
You're absolutely right, Rubie. The drawing room, or what we today think of as the living room, was the room in an elegant residence in the 18th century that more than any other was where you entertained your guests and therefore had to reflect whatever the popular taste of the day was. And as I've been suggesting throughout our tour today, at this time period, that's the neoclassical style, the looking back to classical antiquity for inspiration, for ideas. And so in this showroom that's meant to be the drawing room, we have this lovely fireplace where we have a garniture of sphinxes and a quirky vase on it to give people an idea of what those objects might look like in your own living room. The gallery is filled with vases, and the vase form just takes off at this time period, becomes very, very popular. Wedgwood himself writes about that on a number of occasions to his business partner, Thomas Bentley. He actually didn't like making statues like the Hercules and the Sumnus and others that we saw in the first gallery because they were a lot of work. There was a great chance that they would not survive the kiln firing, something that big and complex that it might suffer a firing crack or even explode. Vases were a lot easier to produce. You could furthermore switch out the type of finial that it had or the type of handles that it had, and suddenly you have a new form. They also were offered at a lower price point, so more people could afford them. So Wedgwood comes up with several hundred different vase forms actually that he offers his visitors. And like some of the other objects that we've seen that are based on objects from different points in time, classical antiquity, 17th century, and so on. Likewise, these vases too derive from the ancient world or from the 16th century or from the 17th or 17th century, or even something that was a new form invented by the factory.
And did the tops actually come off? Did people actually use them, or were they just works of art?
The tops did come off, but they really were just ornamental. They weren't really used to hold flowers in general. I mean, there are always exceptions, of course, but more than anything, they were meant for display.
Mm-hmm. And you spoke earlier about how Wedgwood would display his works in more of a open, not so much gallery setting, but almost like, from a retail perspective?
Oh, yes. And we have kind of a mise en scène, if you will, set up in the back here. Mm-hmm. So we're getting towards the end of the exhibition. We've gone through our 3 showrooms, and we wanted to end on this note, which was to remind the visitors once again that this was a business for Wedgwood. So we cut a window through this wall The illustration on the back wall there is a giant blow up of the depiction of Josiah Wedgwood's showroom as it looked in the early 19th century. He dies in 1795. We don't have any images that survive from his lifetime, but this is when his son was running the factory, early 19th century. And I'm hoping our visitors and viewers will be able to see that the showroom is just chock-a-block with all types of ceramic objects mixed in. There are some basalt pieces and basalt sculptures on the top of one of the display cases on the right, but then there are dinnerwares and teawares and other statues in not just basalt, but in creamware and jasperware, bone china, all the different types of ceramic bodies that the Wedgwood factory made. And so to drive that point home further, the last case we have is the one that's sitting right in front of that two-dimensional depiction of Wedgwood's showroom, where we deliberately mix in the same form made in different bodies, because again, Wedgwood wanted to give the customer what they wanted. So if you wanted Triton candlesticks in black basalt, you could do that. In the 19th century, the factory made it also in what's called majolica, that brightly colored object in the back. Same form, but different ceramic body, different type of decoration. In the front, there's a crouching Venus down on one knee with her hands up in basalt, but the factory also made it in jasperware. Or the other two small busts, again in basalt or in cream colored earthenware, because it was important for Wedgwood and the other potters as well to have a variety of product offerings so that to increase the likelihood that their customers would find something that they would enjoy.
And the jasper seems to be what a lot of us recognize when we think about Wedgwood.
Yes, exactly. That's another great invention of Josiah Wedgwood. He invents jasperware a few years after he perfects the basalt body. That's about 1775.
To the left.
That's right. So the most popular or most common color scheme, if you will, of jasperware is blue and white. And that's what we have an example of here. But he actually made other colors as well, like a sage green and a yellow and a lilac, dark blue, and so on. So again, just lots of different options for a customer shopping for something lovely for their home.
And so finally, as we look at this particular redepiction and the whole exhibition, there was a marriage in between the classical and the sculpture work and then the exhibition, the design itself.
Right.
How do you feel about that marriage of the classic and the contemporary coming together?
I just love the way it's turned out. It's more than I could have even dreamed of it. I think it's just so successful, and I know you'll be talking to my creative colleagues who made it all happen, who had that vision. What I can say is that, again, I mentioned early on, when I first started here in 2007 is when I started to have an idea, however random and ill-formed it was, to do an exhibition like this one day. And about then, I actually came up with the title, Classic Black, the basalt sculpture of Wedgwood and his contemporaries. And I confess that when I first came up with the title, I thought I was being very clever, Classic Black being a reference to the fact that so many of these are based on design sources from classical antiquity. But I eventually realized, well, you know what? Classic has another sense too. In this, it also means timeless. And that got me thinking that, oh yeah, I know these works are based on many on antique sources, but I really want there to be a contemporary vibe in the way we display them to show that these objects really do work even in today's setting. That it doesn't matter if you live in a Robert Adam designed house, which of course almost none of us do, but these objects can look beautiful in your own home with very contemporary colors and furnishings and so on. And then Hannah Crowell, our fabulous exhibition designer, and Al, the immensely talented artist located here in Charlotte, who painted these beautiful murals, they just took that idea and ran with it.
Well, as an art education institution, I think it's wonderful that we use our ability to be creative and innovative and to reimagine. And that's what has been done here. So, Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today, or to talk with me and to share with everyone. And we're going to go and find Hannah and Owl and be able to share more about the design.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Rubie.
I'm so glad to have here with me today my colleague, exhibition designer Hannah Crowell, who has been with the Mint for
4.5 years.
4.5 years, and she has transformed the exhibition process here. We're so excited to have her here to talk with her about this specific exhibition. Each time we do an exhibition, I wonder, how can we top it? How can any exhibition get even better? But by gosh, here we are again, and this is spectacular. Congratulations again on the Wall Street Journal article and your conversation about this exhibition. So tell us, once you realized that we were going to do this exhibition with Brian, the works of art that were going to be featured, Black Basalt, how did you take that classic and combine it with contemporary to come up with what we have here?
Well, with each exhibition, it's sort of a unique news story. And a lot of times you kind of have to unfold the elements of the story, both through the object and conversations with curators. And Brian is, at his core, just an incredible storyteller. So the very beginning all started with just sort of having wonderful conversations with Brian about each of these objects and what they represented, both sort of in their form, but also in how they were made. This exhibition is one of the most, there's many things unique about it, but one of the most unique things is that every object is Black. So we had an entire exhibition that had sort of a one object color, which allowed us to really start thinking about the environment being vibrant, bringing the color to play off of these objects. So sort of some of the early ideas started kind of in color and in story, whether it's Greek mythology or it is sort of some major figurehead, and then how they lived in the homes of their time. And one of the big kind of push that I got both from Brian as well as sort of institutionally was the want and the need to bring the exhibition and the objects into kind of a contemporary context. So there's always sort of these initial ideas early on, and then the research and the discovery that follows that set us on a course of sort of building an exhibition space that could feel relevant to our visitor today while still true and honest to these objects as stories of the past. Mm-hmm. So, of course, I go to, because these come from a very specific time period, went deep into the research, both architecturally, aesthetically, as well as sort of who Wedgwood was. And I, of course, knew of Josiah Wedgwood and the Wedgwood kind of company. But in the research process, I pretty much became a fangirl, a little Wedgwood fangirl, and kind of the brilliance of who he was as kind of a marketer. And one of the early ideas that we all kind of hooked on to, Brian, myself, our exhibition graphic designer, was this idea of the great showroom and how Wedgwood created those showrooms. And so the hook for me early on in creating the exhibition and what the space would feel like was that idea of, I mean, to put it into a kind of a relatable contemporary context, the IKEA showroom. And how those spaces, when you go to IKEA, you go to the spaces and you can just imagine what that room in your home would feel like. And that's how they're selling these products. And Wedgwood did some of the very same things, and how he kind of created showrooms and stores for then are the shoppers of the time to come and look at these and dream about how they would exist in their homes.
Hannah, I noticed how, as you spoke of architecture, you replicated a lot of what we associate with Roman architecture or that time period, with the arches displayed not only here, but also on the walls themselves. How did you come up with that concept as well?
Yeah, well, so part of what I get from the curator is a checklist, and that's just a listing of each of the objects that will be presented in the exhibition, and sort of different, what their size is, and different information that we need to know throughout sort of the exhibition process. And when I started looking at that, I mean, to me, I come from a theater design background, as you know, Rubie, and I always take that as sort of my script. This is the theater script I get. Here's the story, and here's how the cast of characters within it. And so, in talking with Brian, originally the show was sort of organized as the objects and their source material. So where the design, the mold, what it originally was, kind of source the era it was originally designed in. And I sort of spun it around a little bit. And as I mentioned, Wedgwood would create sort of the showroom experience. And I felt that would be a really great anchor for how I would approach designing the space for the objects as well. So I took that checklist and I, kind of took each of those characters and I rearranged them within sort of different themes. And what we ended up landing with was the sculpture hall, which is the first gallery that mostly has the characters of the Greek and Roman mythology and some of the myths. And then there was of course an important collection within the exhibition is all these library busts. So then there's the room of the thinkers and the kind of library room, and then with all the decorative pieces that would be those beautiful display objects that you would have maybe, in your grand dining room or your drawing room. So the final room, otherwise also known as the Purple Gallery, was the drawing room. So kind of creating those spaces and defining those spaces for these objects to live in, it gave me sort of then a further kind of element to research and what were those architectural spaces. You look at some of these medallions, and they were designed specifically to fit within sort of these moments that were built into the architecture, the library bust high on the shelf or in some sort of soffit. So looking then, and thankfully, England has done an incredible job, maintaining and restoring a lot of these historic homes. So I was able to go into a whole world of looking at homes from this period, even some of which still have black basalt objects in them, and using that as this kind of the inspiration for then how we would build out architectural spaces. So for the sculpture hall, bringing in these large archways that could help create sort of the idea of that space. We of course then mimic those in paint, more like a showroom might be in a store on the walls. And creating, then in the library, these tall columns that sort of mimic like big, long, tall bookshelves. And even in areas where we have the busts that are positioned high up, you can see in their design that these busts, the facial features were meant to look down because they would have been shown higher. So we sort of took elements of this existing architecture, and very specifically the Adam style. Robert Adam was a very important architect and kind of designer of his time, and there's an entire form of interior design, interior architecture sort of based off of his style. And so that became an important part of how we created, at first what existed as sort of the white box model of what the galleries would look like.
And architecture is so much of an art form. I think sometimes people miss that, but I love the way that that's been included here. And also you had over 100 objects to work with. How did you how did you decide where they would go and how you would put so many medallions in how did you do that?
Well, it kind of became, again, it's sort of this merging of looking at historical research of what these architectural spaces, the source, what they looked like, what they felt like, how the objects would exist, these sort of, these decorative objects existed then, and how then we could create that. This gallery is just a big white box when I start. And so building out these arches and building out these spaces started to kind of create, chicken and egg, like, we created this beautiful archway, and then how do the medallions sit in that? Or the medallions need an archway. So how do we fill out that space to provide them with kind of the frame that they can, kind of exist in most beautifully? So it is sort of this marriage of kind of looking at the object, knowing how the object, talking with Brian and learning and in researching how the object would have been displayed, and then how the architecture could kind of what we could create of the architecture and the gallery space could mimic that. And figuring out sort of where things go. I mean, I don't see any of these objects before they come into the gallery for installation. And we have a number that are in our museum collections, so I was able to look at some of those. But things like the Somnus here lying, and Neptune and Triton here, like, it was a discovery once they came in the gallery. So some of it is just trying to have an idea of how they will feel in the space and creating the air that will surround that. But it's some of it, figuring out the Somnus here originally, was supposed to sit more within the arch, but once you see him laying there reclined, and pulling him out from the arch so the visitor can interact more and discover more about the object, being able to look at this checklist, this script, this cast of characters, and seeing what needs to be seen in 3D, a 360 view, and what can be mounted up against the wall, and just trying to carve out space for each object to shine.
So as you put all those pieces together, which you just articulated, now it comes down to, how do I execute the design itself, and who do I choose, or do we do it as a team? Do I reach out and get an artist to come in? But you chose a certain route.
Well,
share with
absolutely.
us how and why.
Well, so we, as I mentioned earlier, because all the objects are sort of one color, of course there's variations in that, but we knew we could build out a whole world of color. And so color became a huge part of our toolbox. And then looking at the research, looking at the Adam style, where molding was incorporated in as a way to visually let the eye travel through space. So there was a kind of floor to ceiling, how the moldings, or at times, more mural, trompe-l'oeil, frescoes would pull your eye up so that you were always sort of dancing around the space visually. And we knew we wanted to create that. We wanted to use the same design techniques that were incorporated into this neoclassical and Adam style of these grand mansions that these objects were living in, that we wanted to create that in the galleries. And looking through a lot of different research, we knew we couldn't come in here and just copy and paste what some of these English mansions looked like. We needed to make it achievable, but we also needed to, again, bring it into the historical sort of, pull the historical into the contemporary. And so myself, the exhibition graphic designer, an incredible intern that we had who helped research this, just started digging through a lot of visual inspiration. And we, saw these beautiful, elegant moments of design and all of the images we were looking at. And I knew that, that needed a special touch. It needed someone, not myself and not someone on our team, who could bring in kind of their own vision and collaborate with me to create that kind of visual movement. And I am a huge fan of so many of Charlotte mural artists, street artists, creating public art, making art accessible wherever you turn and go. That sort of expression, I think, is so important for any thriving city, or anywhere really, to see that kind of creativity. And so I've been following that. I find inspiration in that as a designer, as a maker of the art space. And through that, I had been following Al's work for a number of years now, and seeing how she, both at small scale with some more of her studio work, as well as sort of large scale, and I had gotten to know her better when we invited her to come to the Mint for a Constellation CLT installation, where I got to see sort of her process a lot more up close. And it just, everything I looked at, every bit of historic research I looked at, I could see her work in it. And so in approaching her, it was important that she sort of understood the story we were trying to tell. And so Brian and I were able to meet with her and sort of pitch this idea. Everything in this process is all about sort of layers of trust and how we interact with the objects, and it needs a lot of trust. How we create these spaces, trust with each other and trust with our audience, with our visitor. So in that first sort of step in building trust with Al on this project, Brian and I were able to share so much of our story and our passion about what we were trying to create here. And she immediately just locked into it, and so beautifully. So we, kind of taking that white box and giving her a bunch of our research, we started a dialogue, the two of us, and sort of how these spaces would be designed. And some of that I was able to provide her sketches. So I build all the exhibitions in a 3D model in SketchUp. So with that, I'm able to kind of help provide her sort of, a canvas to work on. So she could, the arches and how the arches would be painted on the walls, the big tall columns. We knew we wanted this sort of mantle in the drawing room that we could display objects on. So she got those elements and was able to then just draw and sketch and execute some of the ideas at a small scale to discover how it would ultimately grow into the full scale. Her work and the way that she uses her blob language, it is exactly in line with sort of the way that the design elements of the Atom style were used, that it would pull your eye up and around and so that you would land on these focal points. Mm-hmm. And whether that was a medallion, or it was, an element of a fresco, or it was a bust high on this shelf. And so everything, just in getting to see her process, it just all aligned perfectly to bring her into this. And I've thought so much about it and reflecting on how magical it sort of all was. And, she has this beautiful femininity in her line work that was also very necessary to pair with these objects, so that there was this fluidity that ultimately, kind of housed them and created a space where they felt energetic and like they were moving, even though they were, these locked solid sculptures.
I love the way that this was a courageous step, I think, in traditional classic work like this, mm-hmm. to shift and combine the contemporary with it. So thank you so much for having that kind of vision and taking us to that next level of shifting that paradigm, so we can see the influences of femininity as well as, great artwork. And then to also shift from that traditional artist that we define, right. Fitting in the canon and all that, to a muralist who is actually the artist for this installation. Mm-hmm. So it takes that vision, and you have brought that here. So thank you so much for this exhibition, for the success of it, and we look forward to so many people being able to share through this process. Thanks, Hannah. So we're gonna talk to Al in a few minutes. She's here with us too. So great to gather together. Thanks, Hannah. So we just finished talking with our designer and exhibition designer for this project, Hannah Crowell, and talked about how you came into the picture, Owl. And I'm so glad to have you here today. I'm so excited about the work that you've been doing over the years, as well as being our Constellation Charlotte artist along with Arco. And Constellation Charlotte being such a new way for us to showcase our emerging fabulous local artists, and you are a part of that scene. And so first off, welcome. Glad to have you here. And want to start out with kind of your name and how that comes about, how it fits you, how it is a part of who you are, and your cultural background coming from Colombia, South America, and being a part of the culture here now in Charlotte.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for allowing this space for me to talk about my work and myself. Owl is a entity that I have created back in college when I was doing my associate in fine arts. And back then I was trying to find my identity within the art world, and something that I really resonated with was the street art culture and graffiti. And alongside with Arco, who is the one that kind of taught me the ways of street art, he chose his name, and I figured I need to choose a name. And owl, always, the animal itself really resonated with me. I love the mystery of the owl, and the way that it just, how majestically it would just swing from one tree to the next. So I found a very good connection to the animal itself. And it was a 3-letter name for anything that I wanted to write or tag as far as graffiti or street art. So that's where it came. But I had throughout my life small parts of people that really told me, hey, look at these owls and this owl collection. So it was always kind of wandering in my life, the animal itself. So once I kind of embodied that energy, it has taught me so much about myself. I've been able to connect a lot more to my own culture by using my expression to show other people that this is another version of a Colombian artist in America. So that's been probably one of the biggest parts that Owl has allowed me to discover, is that I could create this visual language that didn't speak English or Spanish. It was this frequency that could talk to objects and take over walls and speak to people with a visual aspect and message.
So speaking of walls, you have transformed this exhibition. I think when I think of owls, I also think of wisdom. And I see that you have brought such an incredible amount of wisdom to how you've done this design, how you've chosen numerous palettes for the different rooms and exhibition spaces that we have. How in the world did you conceptualize this once Hannah told you what we were trying to do? Yeah. And I love, in fact, the mask that you have to coordinate with the exhibition itself. Classic was also so creative. How did you come up with this?
So it was really a collaborative process. We sat down with Hannah and Brian, and each of us sort of came into the room not really knowing what to expect. But what they really trusted was that I had the language and sort of the vision where I could help create that atmosphere that they were narrating to me. So whenever I took Brian's objects that he chose to have in this exhibition, and then the stage of design that Hannah created for me to react to, it was 2 different languages. So one was a sculptural language, and the other one was design. So those 2 were really a great canvas for me to react to. And once I found out more about the objects, what kind of history, what basalt was and all of that, I was able to sit with some of the objects as well, so that I could get a sense and a feel for what the object felt like. And I didn't have access to, well, I did have access to knowing each item, where it was gonna go, but my mind could not take all of that in and make specific choices. I needed to make sure that I left room for that creativity to really tell the story once we were actually here. So when I first pitched the idea of how I wanted the designs to go through the rooms, I didn't really mock up everything. I mocked up certain areas, and then the rest was very intuitive. And as far as the color palette, that was probably one of the most exciting processes that I've had with Hannah and Brian. I showed them a picture of a sunset, and there was something about the timelessness of those hues, that pink to that neon orange almost, to this lavender into yellow. All of those colors evoked emotion, and that's really what I wanted to bring out of the objects and the stage that they had created for them. So when we were going through the colors, we really wanted to immerse the whole exhibition as well as the viewer. So having the colors go all the way up to the ceiling, to the floor, to the pedestals, was really just inviting you into a whole production that you had no idea you were going to walk into. So it was a very intuitive, yet it was three great minds coming together and agreeing on something that was really important as far as the story went. And we chose this color palette and then just kind of broke it down into the different rooms. And from there, we developed exactly how many pedestals were going to have the gradient versus those that didn't, and all of that.
How did you decide on this particular design concept? Because I see a lot of movement, I see a lot of flowing lines, but I also see when I come in this exhibition with the color palette you've used and this combination, it is so serene and it's so peaceful and so joyful. And if there's a care that I have and walk through here, I just feel happy when I leave. And I feel that way actually being drawn into the exhibition itself. To what do you attribute how you came up with this design and the color palettes themselves, specifically these pastels?
Yeah, so you had it right there. I really wanted to evoke that emotion. So I wanted people to come in and feel like they could leave everything outside of these doors, whether it was I have to go back to work, I have to go pick up my kid, or I'm here with, it didn't matter. It just, they were able to be present with these colors, with these objects, with the storyline behind it. And then I left some room for people to fill in the gaps. So the flowing of the lines allow you to sort of sit and just look at it, and maybe you start seeing an object that I would have never drawn on the wall, but you are making it out to your imagination. Mm-hmm. So to me, that was sort of having the background that was activating the story that you wanted to create for your experience.
So with this particular experience, with this particular vessel, it looks like there's an arrow almost pointing down to the object itself. Mm-hmm. And then you surround with contrasting black to blend in with the object. Tell us just about this particular one.
Yeah, so in this room, I wanted to bring more of these angles where the triangles kind of moved around the room. But for this particular one, it actually, to me, whenever I was painting it, I wanted it to feel like there was something coming out, this energy coming out of this vase, and then that energy that comes out then disperses itself back into the form that it is, which is back to its form, original volcanic matter. So it's sort of playing with what it was used for, as well as the actual composition of the object.
So the design itself is almost a combination, kind of like a seashell. Maybe not, I guess it depends on the viewer and the point of view, but is there a specific design template for this, or is this out of your mind?
This is one pattern of several patterns that I use in my work, but this is the main language that I use when I'm talking about my work. And so I've used it for the past 5 years to really be able to form stories or settings, or just to study more of that language. So to me, it's an actual language that gets to not be written, but be appreciated visually. So a lot of people would say, I see shells, I see hair, I see so many different things. But overall is just it's a visual frequency that I'm able to sort of tell different parts of the story if I'm in an exhibition or if I'm collaborating with someone. What I love about it is that I can't reproduce some of these lines. If I were to try to copy and paste this, it would never look the same. So it's unique to the moment that it was created, which is a huge part of me trusting my practice and my intuition to do what it does best.
So as you trust your practice and you've used different palettes in each room, how did you decide which palette would go with which room?
Yeah, so that was a collaborative process between Brian and Hannah. We didn't want to have all these different colors bouncing everywhere in each room, because then it was too loud. It was going to be scattered. So we really wanted to bring in, I love the pink room being that room, because it gave an eeriness to the sculptures. It gave this fantasy of being to be honest, I felt like I was in Mount Olympus, and I was in the middle of a dimension in there, and these sculptures were just hanging out, and I created a language to go along with it. Mm-hmm. And then for the orange room, we have all these great thinkers, and the idea of having these ideas sort of pop up. And so I wanted to represent that in the sun and like the reflections of the sun. So you see a lot of the orange and sort of just very structural sort of designs, sort of like a library that's being lightened by these thinkers. Mm-hmm. So that was why we chose that for that. And for this one, we wanted to create a room where it could feel like you walked into a living room or a dining room, and you could feel like you could entertain your friends and have a holiday party or just a gathering with people, which we can't do now, but this was a great representation of what they would do.
Mm-hmm. And so then you decided to graduate, or you all decided conceptually to graduate the colors. How did you blend the two together to go from that, using this soft palette, and then go into a design that's signature?
Yeah, so the gradation, again, came from the sunset feeling, that gradation, and then using the design aspect. I love interior design. I was a graphic designer before I did any of this. So to me, it was how can I translate a sunset, but in a very abstract owl way? And it was, break the colors into these shapes where you can fool the eye that is still a gradient, but it has structure to it, so that you could allow the eye to just kind of come up from the darkest to the lightest. And so it would allow your eye to bounce back up and down. So it was just a great way to react to the objects.
And does your cultural background, being from Colombia, South America, how did that influence your design work at all? And if so, how?
I think it will always influence my work. I highly admire a lot of artists in Colombia that are actively doing innovative things. So, and every time I visit back home, I try my best to visit museums and visit local artists there as well. So it showed me that there wasn't a specific way that I had to show my culture, but that I was a representation of my culture here, and I needed to show that. Mm-hmm. So that was so important, because within my own community and friends, they feel connected to it, and they feel that proudness of knowing that one of us is out here in Charlotte, North Carolina, expressing themselves, and they didn't have to do it a specific way. Or traditionally, I was always taught that I had to go back into the stories that were in my culture and retell them. And while I'm all for it, I didn't see how I could tie that, because what I wanted to do was to show my expression as that Colombian artist in America. So that was probably where I continue to put in and I also listen to a lot of music. So that influences highly everything that I do, which I always connect the music into my work, and obviously Spanish music is probably at the very top of my list.
Yes. Congratulations on the article in the Wall Street Journal that you spoke so well about how this influenced you and how you were able to be proud to represent your country and to be able to represent for us women and to be able to represent that that emerging artist or those artists who are right here in our community who are so gifted and talented like you all are. So we thank you for all the art that you've been contributing, for your mural, street mural, Black Lives Matter, for Constellation Charlotte, and all the other work that you have been doing. Congratulations. Thank you for sharing with us today. And we look forward to seeing so much more of you in the future.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor and a pleasure. And thank you for giving me the time to
So glad
share
to
this
do
with
it.
you. Thank
It's
you.
been a pleasure.
Appreciate you.